Game of Thrones creator George R.R. Martin is on the warpath and he is going after people who refuse to actually adapt properties and stay true to their canon, stay true to their lore. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. Hit that like button. Let's beat the YouTube algorithm, get more people to watch this video. I wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com, and Martin posted a recent blog post where he issued a scathing warning to Hollywood creators and others that if they ignore canon, their world or the worlds they are adapting will fall apart. He posted this blog post where he was primarily discussing dragons, specifically dragons in Game of Thrones, and compared and contrasted them to various other dragons, such as j.r.r. Tolkien's Smaug and Veramathrax, pejorative in the Disney movie Dragon Slayer, as well as Toothless in How to Train Your Dragon, among others. There's references to Aragon, etc. But after detailing how adaptations of his series got the Targaryen heraldry wrong by including dragons with 4 limbs rather than 2, Martin said this: fantasy needs to be grounded. It is not simply a license to do anything you like. Smaug and Toothless may both be dragons, but they should never be confused. Ignore canon and the world you've created comes apart like tissue paper. So very, very strong words there from George R.R. Martin. That is how he closed out his blog post. Let's read that again. Fantasy needs to be grounded. It is not simply a license to do anything you like, meaning there is a rule set. You need to follow the rules. You need to follow the canon that has been created. Smaug and Toothless may both be dragons, but they should never be confused. That's because a dragon like Toothless would never be able to show up in Lord of the Rings. They both might be dragons, but they should never be confused as being able to be part of the same universe. Like Smaug could potentially be part of the How to Train Your Dragon universe, but he would be kind of like an evil dragon. I think we've seen that. At least I haven't read any of the books, but have seen that in the first film where you did see kind of some evil dragons at work. So that could be a possibility, but Toothless would never work in the Lord of the Rings. All of the dragons in the Lord of the Rings are villainous, which goes back to ancient tradition of depicting dragons as evil. You can point to, which George Martin does, given the fact that he says he's named after him, points to St. George, the Dragon Slayer, patron saint of England. And then to further point to or elucidate what he's saying, he says, ignore canon and the world you've created comes apart like tissue paper. This is something I have been saying for years now because it is absolutely true. You see it, and it's very easy to identify. It really does kind of drop any kind of immersion into the story that you're happen to be reading, happen to be watching, happen to be listening to, etc. Whatever medium it happens to be in, it does indeed just come apart like tissue paper. And he's hammering it home. And this isn't the first time he's kind of made these comments. He bashed Hollywood screenwriters and producers for believing they can improve on the source material of standout authors such as Ian Fleming, Stan Lee, j.r.r. Tolkien, and others when they attempt to adapt their stories to film or television. He wrote this just at the end of May. Everywhere you look, there are more screenwriters and producers eager to take great stories and make them their own. We can just look at the people that are doing the Rings of Power. Look at Leslie Headland, the people over at Lucasfilm. These people think that they can do better than the original creators, and they have absolutely no understanding of the property they are actually adapting. It does not seem to matter whether the source material was written by Stan Lee, Charles Dickens, Ian Fleming, Roald Dahl, Ursula K. Le Guin, j.r.r. Tolkien, Mark Twain, Raymond Chandler, Jane Austen, or, well, anyone. No matter how major a writer it is, no matter how great the book, there always seems to be someone on hand who thinks he can do better, eager to take the story and improve on it. The book is the book, the film is the film, they will tell you as if they were saying something profound. Then they make that story their own. They never make it better. Better though. 999 times out of 1,000, they make it worse. That is absolutely accurate. I think the evidence speaks for itself. One need only look at things like The Acolyte, look at things like Wheel of Time, look at things like The Rings of Power. They always, for the most part, make it worse. He did note that sometimes they do indeed get it right. He does praise FX's recent Shogun adaptation. He says, once in a while, though, we do get a really good adaptation of a really good book. And when that happens, it deserves applause. I came across one of those instances recently when I binged the new FX version of Shogun. I think the author would have been pleased. Both old and new screenwriters did honor to the source material and gave us terrific adaptations, resisting the impulse to make it their own. I think Peter Jackson also did a really good job in his adaptations of The Lord of the Rings. Obviously, I think there is a lot of room for criticism in his adaptation of The Hobbit. I do think he did a really good job with The Lord of the Rings, although Christopher Tolkien, J.r.r. Tolkien's son, did have some pointed criticisms about that, and I think those criticisms are also warranted. I think Martin could have done. I think he could have improved it, but I really like what he got, especially if you watch those extended editions. I still think we should have gotten Scouring of the Shire, though. I think that was a huge missed opportunity not to have that. I think that was key to the themes that J.r.r. Tolkien was indeed writing about. Not to include that was just simply wrong. But again, I think that is another excellent adaptation that we've seen. And so he's made similar comments before, back in 2022, alongside novelist Neil Gaiman, who is now what he's up to. We're not going to talk about in this video, but the two spoke on the subject during an appearance at the New York City's Symphony Space. This is what Variety reported. Martin rhetorically asked, how faithful do you have to be? Some people don't feel that they have to be faithful at all. There's this phrase that goes around, I'm going to make it my own. I hate that phrase. And I think Neil probably hates that phrase too. And then Gaiman said, I do. I spent 30 years watching people make Sandman their own. And some of those people hadn't even read Sandman to make it their own. They just flipped through a few comics or something. Martin then detailed, there are changes that you have to make or that you're called upon to make that I think are legitimate. And there are other ones that are not legitimate. And then Variety's Ethan Shanfield, who was kind of covering the story, he wrote this, that Martin recalled Roger Zelazny's adapting The Last Defender of Camelot for the Twilight Zone, and that, quote, due to budget constraints, being forced to choose between having horses or an elaborate Stonehenge-esque set for a battle scene. Martin did not want to make the decision, so he left it up to Zelazny, who chose to cut the horses. And Martin explained it this, that, to my mind, is the kind of stuff you're called upon to do in Hollywood that is legitimate. He even noted this is why the Iron Throne is not depicted in Game of Thrones as it is written in the books. He said, why is the Iron Throne in Game of Thrones not the Iron Throne as described in the books? Why is it not 15 feet high and made of 10,000 swords? Because the ceiling in our soundstage was not 15 feet high. We couldn't fit it in there, and they weren't willing to give us St. Paul's Cathedral or Westminster Abbey to shoot our little show in. So I actually agree with him there. I think there are kind of some legitimate changes, things like that, where you're dealing with budget constraints, where you're dealing with just the reality of where you're shooting, etc. And I don't think there's anything wrong with making minor changes to things like that, like the size of the Iron Throne, etc. Because I think there are ways that you can still film things like that to make it still look as impressive as it does in the books. So I do understand that. And J.r.r. Tolkien has talked about this as well. Obviously, he has a whole letter where he kind of basically destroys this screenwriter's script for an adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. And he even talks about kind of removing, if you're going to remove any kind of battle scene, you should remove the battle at the Hornburg, battle at Helm's Deep, instead of getting rid of the the trees and things like that he thought were much more things that needed to be included as far as the themes that he was trying to touch on in the books. So I think he would agree with that as well. But I did want to point out to J.r.r. Tolkien, because I think what Martin is saying here is exactly what J.r.r. Tolkien has talked about in his essay on fairy stories that he not only gave as a lecture, but he wrote so many years ago. And he said that a story maker proves himself a successful sub-creator when he makes a secondary world which your mind can enter. Inside it, what he relates is true. It accords with the laws of that world. You therefore believe it while you are, as it were, inside. So the canon, the lore, etc. The moment disbelief arises, the spell is broken. The magic, or rather art, has failed. You are then out in the primary world again, looking at the little abortive secondary world from outside. If you are obliged by kindliness or circumstance to stay, then disbelief must be suspended or stifled. Otherwise, listening and looking would become intolerable. But the suspension of disbelief is a substitute for the genuine thing, a subterfuge we use when condescending to games or make believe, or when trying more or less willingly to find what virtue we can in the work of an art that has, for us, failed. So Tolkien is explaining this as well. If you do not stay true to the laws of the world, if you do not stay true to the canon, if you do not stay true to the legendarium, to the lore, it becomes an abortive secondary world and you can no longer immerse yourself in it. The spell is broken. The magic, or rather art, has failed. It was very, very clear here. And I think George R.R. Martin is kind of echoing what J.R.R. Tolkien said so many years ago. And it's absolutely true. Like I said, you can see this in any number of IPs where they have completely just gone off the rails when it comes to canon, gone off the rails when it comes to the rules of the universe that these things are set in. People are tuning out. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, 63% decline, or maybe not even decline, but 63% of the people that watched the first episode did not finish the first season, according to a report from the Hollywood Reporter. Just look at the decline in Star Wars. The Acolyte is one of the worst performing, if not the worst performing. I think it actually is now the worst performing Star Wars show on Disney Plus, based on the most recent Nielsen numbers covering the show's third episode. People are just tuning out of these shows. And in many cases, I don't even think they're giving them a chance anymore. They're just fed up with Hollywood taking all of these liberties and not staying true to the actual source material. And by doing so, creating this repeated pattern, they are damaging any potential opportunities to adapt things in the future because they have not stayed true to the source material in the past, and people aren't even willing to give it a chance. But just wanted to bring this to your attention. It's good to see that George R.R. Martin is actually talking about this, raising this. I think this is something that needs to be done, and I'm glad that he is doing it. I can disagree with him on a lot of things. I think a lot of times when he was making these comments previously, he was doing this because he was trying to distance himself from the Game of Thrones season. What is it? Season 8 or whatever it was. The last season of Game of Thrones, where he is now saying that he didn't really consult and everything like that, despite early interviews basically saying like he had given them significant notes and they kind of stayed true to what it was. And that was very similar to his ending. But regardless, I appreciate him calling this stuff out. He is a big fish in the pond there, pointing this out. And I think this is something that Hollywood needs a course correction on. Obviously, I don't think that is something that they will indeed listen to, given the fact that I think a lot of those people are indeed ideological. And for certain books, such as J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings or C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia series, they will actively try and subvert those because they have lots of themes that are contrary to their ideology. But it's good to know that George R.R. Martin is calling this stuff out. But let me know what you guys make of this. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, but to always speak the truth.